Recording in progress.
Hare Krishna, we'll begin with our prayers. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavansha Shri Rupam Sagrajata Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamsha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः नमः ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामी निधि नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे Hare Krishna, we are continuing our discussion from third canto Srimad Bhagvatam, chapter 26, fundamental principles of material nature. And in this chapter, Kapila is instructing about the principle, the Jnana, the Sankhya in more detail. And we have discussed the first 8 verses. So far in this third chapter, 26th chapter, Kapila he started answering the third question of Mother Devahuti about the Jnana. And in this, he describes the universal form for the 5th time, Virata Rupa for the 5th time. And we had heard the description why there are different times. Shukdeva Goswami is describing the same universal form. The reason is different, the purpose is different. So in the first 2 verses, Kapila Dev describes the benefits of hearing the Sankhya philosophy. It gives freedom from the modes, gives self-realization, and cuts off the knots of attachment to the material world. And then the result is Hridaya Granthi Bhedanam, that is the second verse, describes the knots in the heart are cut. And then he describes the interactions between Jiva, Prakriti, and Purusha and their characteristics. So he describes first in the third verse the characteristics of the Lord, how he is Supreme Lord, he has no beginning, Anadi, Prakriti, Para, beyond the material nature, and he is situated in his spiritual abode. He is self-effulgent, Vishwam Yena Samanvitam, and from him all the universes they appear. And then he performs the various pastimes with this material nature. In the fourth verse, he describes how the Lord interacts with the material nature. And Srila Prabhupada focuses on the word Leela, how the Lord performs his pastimes. Although he is situated in this material world, but he is not affected by the material world. Then in the 3 verses, he describes the interaction of the Jiva with the material nature. First, he describes about the Lord, then Lord's interaction with the material nature, and then interaction of the Jiva with the material nature. And in that, he describes how the living entity gets bewildered by seeing the various forms which are offered by the material nature. And then in the 7th verse, he describes because of this misconception, he is bound in the cycle of birth and death. So we'll continue from the 8th verse, 9th verse. Now, after hearing about Jiva, Prakriti, and Purusha, in the 9th verse, again, Devahuti will ask about the material nature and Supreme Lord. And in response to this question, Kapila Dev will describe the characteristics and the products of the material nature, that is Pradhana. Let's recite the ninth verse. Devahutirvacha prakrite purushasyapi lakshanam purushottama
Lakshanam Purushottama
sad asaccha yadatmakam.
Atmakam.
Devotee said, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, kindly explain the characteristics of the Supreme Person and these energies. For both of these are the causes of this manifest and unmanifest creation.
So now Devati is asking, O Purushottama, O Supreme Lord, please tell me, Bruhi. The second line says Bruhi Karanya, or Bruhi means please tell me. Prakrite Purushasyapi Lakshanam. Please tell me the characteristics of Prakriti and Purusha. Who is that? That Purusha is the Karanayor Asya. He is the cause of the universe. And this universe it is composed of Sad Asad Cha Yad Atmakam. This universe is composed of the gross and subtle elements. So please tell me about the Supreme Lord. Please tell me about the Prakriti. So that is a question which she is asking. Srila Prabhupada writes about Prakriti. Prakriti is connected with both the Supreme Lord and the living entities, just as a woman is connected with her husband and as a wife, and with her children as a mother. So Prakriti is the wife of Supreme Lord, and she gives rise to all the living entities. As Krishna says, Aham Bija Pradah Pita. So mother is Prakriti. She provides all the ingredients for the bodies of the living entities. So that's why she is the mother. So Srila Prabhupada writes, now the relationship of a living entity with material nature has been explained. Now an understanding of the relation between material nature and Supreme Lord is sought by Devahuti. So what is the connection between the material nature and the Lord? That is the question which she is asking. And then Prabhupada writes in the second paragraph, it is confirmed in ninth chapter. Under his glance, Maya Adhyakshena Prakriti Suyate Sa Characharam. It is not that material nature works blindly. It is all working under the direction of the Supreme Lord. And Devahuti wanted to know how nature works. She wanted to learn the characteristics. So it is not that Devahuti is not aware of all this. She knows all these things. She is the mother of the Supreme Lord. She knows how things are working in the world. But she is asking all these things so that Supreme Lord can himself tell and the world can again get benefited. So that's how the great souls, whenever they ask questions for the welfare of people in general. It is not that they need the answers, they know the answers. The same thing is with Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada writes, the relationship of the living entities with matter and of the Supreme Lord with matter, they are not on the same level. So how the Lord is related to matter and the living entities are related to matter, they are different. But the Mayavadis, they say, no, they are one. The living entities and the Lord, they are one. So that is what Prabhupada writes. The Mayavadi philosophers ascribe this bewilderment to the Supreme Lord also. Oh, living entities, we have forgotten that we are God. So we are same as the Lord and we have forgotten. But it is not like that. Living entity never gets bewildered. Etad ishanam ishasya prakriti sthopi tad gunai na yujyate sadatmasthai yatha buddhi tadashraya. The Supreme Lord, although he is working under this material nature, in this material nature, he never gets affected by the material nature. He is always the controller of the material nature. So Prabhupada writes, the difference between the conditioned soul and the material nature is different between the conditioned soul and the Lord is that the Lord is the Lord, the master of the universe. The Lord always remains the Lord. He never gets affected by anything of the world. And therefore is not subjected to its control. He is controlled neither by the spiritual nature nor by the material nature. It is not that he is controlled by spiritual nature, but he is sometimes controlled by the spiritual nature just to show mercy to the devotees, just to show the various wonderful pastimes. And then Srila Prabhupada writes, there are two words used, Sat and Asat. Cosmic manifestation is Asat, the Lord is Sat. Okay, so after she asks this question, Kapaladev, he starts answering the question. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Yatta Yaktam
Nityam sarvasada
Pradhanam Prakritim Prahu Shabad
avishesham vishesham.
The three persons of Godhead say the unmanifested eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifested and is called Pradhan. This is called Prakriti when in the manifested state of existence.
So now 10th to 14th verses describes the various products, characteristics and products of Pradhana. So the same thing we have heard many times. The fifth time, the same things are going to be described. How from Pradhana, then Mahatattva, then all the things are created. So Kapaladev says, Prakriti Prahu, Prakriti Pradhana. So Prakriti is also called as Pradhana. It is also called as Avyakta. Trigunam Avyaktam. And this Prakriti, when it is affected by three modes, gets further transformed and becomes Pradhana by manifesting variety. Visheshavat. Visheshavat means when the Prakriti manifests some varieties, it is called as Visheshavat. It becomes Pradhan. So therefore, different variety characteristics of Prakriti are described. Chakravarti Thakur gives some purport. The aggregate of three gunas is called Avyakta, Pradhan, and Prakriti. Same things we have heard many times. The same thing is described as Avyakta, Prakriti, Pradhan. It is called Avyakta. Why it is called as Avyakta? It is invisible. It is not perceivable by the senses so easily. Though it still possesses particularity due to the balance of the three modes. Still, there is some divisions, but still it is not so visible. Then why it is called as Pradhan? Because it manifests variety. So the first thing which manifests from Pradhan is Mahatattva. It is the best amongst the all partial forms which are its effects, being the shelter of the particular elements called Mahatattva. So why it is called as Avyakta, why it is called as Pradhana, and why it is called as Prakriti. It is called Prakriti because it is the cause of other causes and effects. That's why it's called as Prakriti. So the same thing known by different names. Prakriti, Pradhan, or Avyakta. These are all the same things mentioned here. Okay. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport. Prakriti. The Lord points out material nature in its subtle stage, which is called Pradhana, and he analyzes this Pradhana. Explanation of Pradhan and Prakriti is that Pradhan is subtle, and when the total material elements are manifested, then it becomes Prakriti. One may say Pradhan is Brahman, but actually the Brahman state is not Pradhana. Pradhan is distinct from Brahman because in Brahman there is no existence of the material modes of nature. One may argue that Mahatattva is also different from Pradhana because in the Mahatattva there are different manifestations. The actual explanation of Pradhan is given here. So Srila Prabhupada is just explaining what is Pradhan, what is Brahman. Some people say Brahman is Pradhan only, but no, Brahman is having no distinctions, no variety. But in Pradhan there is little variety. So that is why Pradhan is different from Brahman. And then Prakriti is also different. Prakriti has little more distinction variety than Pradhan. Although we call Prakriti Pradhan same, but still there is some distinction which is mentioned here. Okay, so now after this, the same thing which we have heard many times arises from the Prakriti. What all things arises? Panchabhi Panchabhir Brahma
Panchatavi Panchabhir Brahma
Chatubhe Dashabhe Tatha
Chaturvi Dashanishtatha
Etat Vimshatikam
Edachaturvishatikam
Ganam Pradhanam Viduhu.
Pradhanayakam Vidu.
Five gross elements, the five subtle elements, the four internal senses, the five senses for the gathering knowledge, and the five outward organs of the action are known as pradhan.
So now it is describing what all things are produced. 14 products are formed from Pradhana. The simple, the last stage of the entire table. We have seen many times in our Udani also. What all things are produced? Panchabhi, five gross elements, they are produced. Then Panchabhi Brahma. So first, Panchabhi means the 10. 10 tanmatras are produced. Then five gross elements are produced. Then Chatubhi. What is this Chatubhi? Chatubhi means the four elements of Antahkaran. What is Antahkaran? We have discussed this sometime. Antahkaran kya hota hai? Antahkaran is made up of four elements: mind, intelligence, ego. These are the four elements of Antahkaran: mind, intelligence, ego, and Chitta or consciousness. This Chitta is the contaminated consciousness, the consciousness which is rooted in the material nature. That is called as Chitta. And Chit means the pure consciousness. So this Antahkaran means the subtle elements and consciousness. They together form Antahkaran. So this word we can remember. What is Antahkaran? And I think Krishna Chakravarti Thakur also, yeah, he describes. He doesn't tell the details. 5, 5, 14. So 20. 24 elements are totally produced. Srila Prabhupada writes. So if you see in the purports of Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada doesn't go into the technical details of the creation anywhere. Whenever he mentions it in a very, very a broad way and doesn't go into the details as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur mentions. So if you want to know the details of the creation, then we have to refer to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur only. Because Srila Prabhupada, he knows the Kali Yuga people, not everybody is inclined to philosophical understanding, analysis. हम इतना ही पढ़ के हमको लग रहा है बाप रे कब खत्म होगा ये सब. Such complex. So therefore Prabhupada never goes into the detail. So here also, if you see the purport of Prabhupada, Prabhupada takes just some theme of the verse and gives some purport from that. And here Prabhupada takes the theme that there are 24 elements, and he quotes from Bhagavad Gita. Mama yonir mahad brahma tasmin garbham dadhami aham. So Krishna says, I impregnate the material nature with this Mahat Brahma, with this Prakriti. I impregnate Prakriti with the living entities. So the Prakriti is described here as the 24 elements. So sum total of the living entities is impregnated into this Mama Yonir Mahad Brahma. So Prakriti is made up of 24 elements, and in that the living entities are impregnated. And living entities are, what are the 5 elements in the beginning, which comes from Lord Mahavishnu? What are the 5 elements? Vasudeva. From the Vasudeva, what are 5 things come? Dravya, Kala, Karma, Swabhav, and Jiva. So basically, Jiva has the Karma and Swabhav. It is not separate. Jiva has the karma and swabhava, and then dravya and kal is added. So that's how the Supreme Lord, he impregnates the living entities into this pradhana. Okay, so now next verse, he continues. What are the five gross elements? So Panchabhi, what are the five gross elements? What are the five subtle elements? What are the four internal senses? Chatubhi. Internal senses means antahkaran. And Chatubhi, Eta Chaturvimshatikam. And that's why Chaturvimshi, 24 elements are produced. So then what are these? That is described in further verses. So what are the five gross elements? Translation, somebody can read. 12th verse.
There are five gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether. There are also five subtle elements, smell, taste, color, touch, and sound.
Next.
The senses for acquiring knowledge and the organs for action. Number 10, namely the auditory senses, the senses of taste, the tactile senses, the senses of sight, the sense of smell, the active organ for speaking, the active organs for working, and those for traveling, generating, and developing.
So 10 senses are produced, 5 working senses and 5 knowledge acquiring senses. They are described. And then in the 14th verse, the 4 elements of antahkaran are described. Mano buddhir ahankara. Mano buddhir ahankara. Chittam ityantaratmakam. Chaturtha.
चतुर्था लक्ष्यते भेदो
The senses are experienced as having four aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics.
So the 4 antahkarana, they are described here. This 4 antahkaran goes to the next body along with the soul. So what are they? Antaratmakam, they are the internal sense organs. They are not the external sense organs. They are not the gross. They are subtle. They are divided into Chaturdha Lakshyate Bhedo. What are these Chaturdha? Mano, mind. Buddhi, intelligence. Ahankara and Chitta. It is not Chit. It is Chitta. The difference between Chit and Chitta is Chit means pure consciousness, free from the material contaminations. Chitta means the consciousness which is rooted in this material world. That forms the antahkaran. And this chitta, it is a representative of Mahatattva. Krishna Prabhupada writes, the 4 internal senses are described here, are defined by different characteristics. When pure consciousness is polluted by material contamination, when identification with the body becomes prominent, one is said to be situated in a false ego. So that is called as chitta, ahankara. Because of this chitta, one gets situated in this ego, false ego. Bhagavad Gita also Krishna describes these elements, 13th chapter, 6th and 7th. Same. Mahabhutani ahankara buddhir avyaktam cha indriyani dashaikam cha panchachendriya gochara. So all these are the 24 elements which Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita also. Mahabhutani, the 5 elements. Then ahankar, false ego. Buddhi, intelligence. Avyakta means mahatattva or pradhana. Then indriyani dashaikam, the 10 senses, 5 working and 5 knowledge acquiring, and dasha ekam. Ekam means the 11th one, means the mind. And panchacha indriya gochara, 5 tanmatras. Okay, 24. So that's how Krishna also describes in Bhagavad Gita. So there, Krishna describes Etad Kshetram Samasena Savikaram Udaritam. 7th verse says, Ichha, Dvesha, Sukham, Dukkham, Sanghatas, Chetana, Dhriti, Etad Kshetram Samasena. So Krishna says these are the transformations of the material nature. So who experiences Kshetra means the body. Body is dead. Who experience all these emotions? Ichha, dvesh, sukha, dukkha. Who experiences? All these emotions are experienced by whom? It is experienced by the soul. But here he is saying it is a transformation arising in the body. Kshetra samasena. Etat kshetra samasena savikara. So why Krishna is saying these are the transformations in the body, although the soul experiences these transformations. Because the soul's consciousness is rooted in this material world. So whatever is happening with the body, the soul thinks it is happening with me only. So that's why this is contaminated consciousness. It is like a person watching a movie in the theater. When a hero is having a good time, the vikar is happening on the screen, right? All the changes are happening on the screen, but who is experiencing the change? The person who is sitting. Although nothing is happening with the person. Because the person starts identifying with the things happening on the screen. Similarly, all the things are happening in the material nature, all the transformations, but we start thinking that you may hai. This is me and this is mine. So that's why we experience vikara. So this chitta means contaminated consciousness. That consciousness which is projected within the matter. It is not projected in Krishna. When it is projected in Krishna, it is pure, it is chit. But when it is projected in material matter, it is projected in matter, then it becomes contaminated. So as till the time the person is in movie theater, he'll be affected. What he has to do, he has to just move out of the movie theater. So that's how we, a living entity, gets caught up in this contaminated consciousness.
If the conscience is getting contaminated, then why do we count that as a contaminated conscious? Why it is mentioned separately over there?
Because that is one of the elements which is coming in this material world so that the soul can function. The mind, the intelligence, and the ego, they are all the transformations of this material energy only. Similarly, the chitta gets, that means the consciousness which is contaminated is also one of the elements which is given, which is described here. And this contaminated consciousness makes entangles the living entity in this material world. So when we have original consciousness, that consciousness is rooted in Krishna. Then we don't experience, then a living entity does not suffer. The pure devotees, they may go through same transformations in the body, but they don't suffer because of it. Because it is the nature of the material body to go through the six changes. But the material person suffers because of the changes. Why this is happening to? But the pure devotee does not suffer. They understand that this is not me, this is my body. So they don't go through the vikara. They don't go through the, they don't suffer. As it is said, miseries are compulsory, suffering is optional.
So these are all like circle. So we be able to compare with the gross. For the mind, we can understand it's purified. Basically, we are able to control the mind, we always say. And then intelligence use it properly. And similarly, false ego has to be eliminated. We have to understand.
Right.
But in case of this uncontaminated soul, which we say, how it is going to be present in a pure devotee? If a pure devotee, this path, which we call chitta, not the chitta, conscious, that chitta, it will not be manifested at all. For that,
Yes, because see, the mind can be purified. Similarly, the chitta gets purified. The consciousness, when it is rooted in Krishna, it is pure consciousness. When it is rooted in the material nature, it is contaminated consciousness. When the mind is attached to the things of the world, same thing which is described many times. Kapil Dev begins this by saying mind is the pivot, right? Attached mind is the cause of bondage, and liberated mind is the cause of the detached mind is the cause of liberation. So by the process of practices, spiritual practices, the mind gets purified, the intelligence, the ego, and then the chitta also gets purified. That is called as chit, that is situated in Krishna.
Chitta is carrying the past impressions. That has to be a purity.
Yeah, so the impressions of enjoyment that I can enjoy in this world, that is called as contaminated consciousness. So after by the practice, one realizes I can't enjoy this world is not for my enjoyment. So that's how one starts getting purified. So that Kshetra Vikar, it is actually happening in the body, but the soul experiences that I am going through the changes. So Sanghata Chetana, Ichha, Dvesh, Sukh, Dukh, Sanghata Chetana, Dhriti. Dhriti means the conviction. So the conviction we have in this world is also the result of the material conditionings. Because of the material conditionings, a person develops a different type of convictions. I can enjoy in this world. That's the conviction of the material living entity. So that's why all these are Kshetra Vikare, Tad Kshetram Samasena Sa Vikaram Mudharitam. So in these two verses in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes the entire Sankhya of Kapiludeva. That's why Bhagavad Gita is a summary. जो सांख्य यहाँ पे 4, 5, 6 चैप्टर में पढ़ाएंगे, Krishna speaks only 2 verses in Bhagavad Gita. So that's how it is described here there. Because for Arjuna, it was not so much of a question there. But Krishna still wanted to give all the information. Krishna wanted Arjuna to come to the final conclusion of Sankhya. What is the final conclusion of Sankhya? Srila Prabhupada writes in the 5th chapter. Sankhya yoga prithak bala pravadanti na pandita ekam apyasita samyak ubhayor vindate phalam yat सांख्य प्राप्यते स्थानम तद योगैरपि गम्यते. जो सांख्य से मिलेगा वो योग से भी मिलेगा. Prabhupada writes in the purport a very interesting line. Sankhya he compares with what finding the root of the tree, and bhakti means
Watering the root.
watering the root of the tree. So Krishna wanted Arjuna to come to this conclusion of watering the root, bhakti karo. So that's why he does not describe that in great detail. So now after this, from 15th to 49th verses,
Hare
he
Krishna.
yes, verse.
I just wanted the clarification between the false ego and the chittam, the contaminated consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada in the purport last line writes, the consciousness polluted by material contamination is called ahankara. So the I'm just trying to understand and just clarify to me. It looks like to me mind, intelligence, and the false ego, and this that false ego's manifestation is the chittam, contaminated consciousness. Is it what it means? Because in a way it looks both similar. So
Yes. So basically, Prabhupada doesn't go into the technical, details of the difference between the ego and the contaminated consciousness. So basically, if you compare, the ego is the boss in this world. The desire of every living entity is the first is the contaminated consciousness that I want to be the controller. That controllership, that contaminated consciousness manifests as an ego. As Srila Prabhupada writes, the consciousness polluted by material contamination is called ahankar. So all these elements, they are subsequently produced. First thing which happens, this is described in, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes in Madhurya Kadambini, the details of how a jiva falls down. First thing which happens with the living entity is misconception that I am the enjoyer. That is contaminated consciousness. The consciousness is the first thing which gets contaminated. The first thing which happens with the living entities, consciousness gets contaminated. And because of that, he comes in this material world. Now he has to be provided with all the facilities so that he can express his contaminated consciousness. So for that, Supreme Lord provides the subtle body. And the subtle body is made up of false ego mind and intelligence. First, the false ego is produced that, okay, you are the boss. You are really the boss. So that's the, hierarchy, that's the, that's the downfall, how a living entity comes in this world. So contaminated consciousness is the first thing. Then the layer of the subtle body is formed, comprising of false ego, then the mind intelligence, and then the gross body is given so that he can express his desires. So that's how a living entity gets trapped in this material world. Okay, so there is a, just like from pradhana comes mahatattva. The contaminated consciousness produces ahankara with ego. And ego means whatever living entity desired, that represents, that comes in the form of ego. And then to support the ego, the first planning manager is intelligence. And the mind is a supporting system which always assists the false ego. अच्छा मन को अहंकार को क्या अच्छा लगेगा? So mind will desire that. Mind will desire, okay, ये अच्छा लगेगा, ये अच्छा लगेगा. This will like this. Ego will like this. Ego will like that. Okay, how to get this? Then intelligence is the planning strategy manager. The intelligence plans how to get what mind, what intelligence, what ego likes. Mind ने तो बताया ये अच्छा लगेगा, वो मिलेगा कैसे? That intelligence plans. So that's how the subtle body works to ultimately support the contaminated consciousness that I am the controller. Okay, so that's how things happen in this material world. So now from 15 to 18 verses, the 25th element is described. 24 elements तो यहाँ पे बता दिए. Panchavi Brahma, Chaturbir Dashubhi. There is 25th element also, and that is called as time factor. So what is this time factor? Read the translation. Somebody can read the translation. 25th verse. 15th verse, the 25th element.
All these are considered the qualified. All these are considered the qualified Brahman, the mixing element, which is known as time, is counted as the 25th element.
So time is the 25th element. Kala Panchavimshakaha. And then Srila Prabhupada writes, everything manifests from Brahman. From Brahman, the material nature manifests. And then material nature consequently starts differentiating into various elements. So therefore Prabhupada writes, Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, सब कुछ ब्रह्म से ही आ रहा है. And then Prabhupada writes, there is Saguna Brahma, there is Nirguna Brahma. What is Nirguna Brahma? Nirguna means not that no qualities, that means no material qualities. That is spiritual world. Saguna Brahma means the material world, which is full of the three modes. Okay, 16th verse. Now, what is being described here is not time per se. The effects of time are described. Because nobody can describe time per se. Time होता क्या उसको नहीं बता सकते. Time का effects ही बता सकते हैं. So the effects of time are described in the 16th verse. Prabhavam paurusham praho kalameke yato bhayam ahankara vimudhasya kartu prakritamiyushaha.
Influence of the spirit of the Godhead is felt in the time factor, which causes fear of death due to false ego of the deluded soul who has contacted material nature.
Yeah. So काल प्राहु, काल को बोला जाता है पौरुषम. It is the time, it is the Lord's power. As Krishna says, Kalo Asmi, I am the time. Sarvam Kala Kritam Manye. कौन बोलता है? Bhishma Dev tells. Sarvam Kala Kritam is all time factor. Who is this time factor? ये जो सामने खड़े हैं आपके He is not your cousin. Yan manyase matuleyam surin mitram priyattamam akurot sachivam दूतम सौरिदात अथ सारथी, इसमें से कुछ भी नहीं है। ये मत समझिए कि आपके दूत हैं, मित्र हैं। ये ईश वही भगवान साक्षात, सुप्रीम लॉर्ड हु इज स्टैंडिंग इन फ्रंट, एंड इनकी इच्छा से सब कुछ हो रहा है। सो दिस टाइम इज द लॉर्ड्स पावर, एंड व्हाट इट डज, यतो भयम कर्तु, इट क्रिएट्स फियर इन लिविंग एंटिटीज, fear of death, because the living entity, when they come in touch with material nature, prakritim iyusha. Iyusha means when they come in contact with material nature, what happens? Ahankara vimudasya. Bhagavad Gita verse, similar concept. Ahankara vimudhatma prakrite kriyamanani gunai karma. So ahankara vimud jiva, because a living entity, when comes in touch with material nature, gets bewildered by ego, thinks that I am the doer, and then in due course of time, he becomes fearful. So by default, प्रभुपाद किस पे यहाँ पे परपोर्ट देंगे बताइए? बिना परपोर्ट देखे ही हम लोग बस किस पे परपोर्ट में क्या बोलने वाले? He is basically describing about भय। यतो भयम अहंकार विमूढ़ात्मा, बस उस पे ही बोलेंगे, अहंकार विमूढ़ात्मा पे ही बोलने वाले। First line, Prabhupada. The living entity's fear of death is due to his false ego of identifying with the body. Bhayam dvitiya abhinivesh. Ishad apetasya viparyaya asmriti. When one forgets the Lord, bhayam comes, because one starts thinking in terms of dvitiya. ये मेरा है और ये मेरा है. That creates fear. Prabhupada writes, the material body is called dvitiya, the second. One who is absorbed in the second element or the second exhibition of spirit is afraid of death. Bhayam dvitiya abhinivesh. When one starts thinking something separately from the Lord and thinks that I am this body, then one becomes fearful. Dvitiya abhinivesh. And therefore the time destroys everything. Then Prabhupada writes, time is a representation of the Lord, and it reminds us also that we must surrender to the Lord. Then Prabhupada quotes a verse from Bhagavad Gita. A Brahma Bhuvana Loka Punaravartino Arjuna Amapaityadu Kaunteya Punarjanmana Vidyate. Prabhupada writes that. Therefore, we must accept the time factor as a Supreme Lord. Then he explains the time factor in little more detail in the next verse. Prakriter guna samyasya nirvisheshasya manavi cheshtayatasta bhagavan kala ityupalakshitah.
My dear mother, O daughter of Satyavama, the time factor, as I have explained, the supreme person of the Godhead, from whom the creation begins as a result of the vegetation of the neutral and neutral nature.
Then again he says, Bhagavan Kala. Bhagavan Kal matlab he is powerful time. The time is not so ordinary, it is powerful time. पहले भी बोले ना इसमें पौरुषम प्राहु काल, फिर से बोल रहे हैं भगवान काल. Oh daughter of Swayambhu Mano Manavi, Bhagavan Kala, this supreme, this is the most powerful time. And it is described what it does. Again, you know, the effects are described, not time factor per se. क्या करता है? यतः, this time factor, prakritir guna samyasya, it produces agitation in the prakriti. वही होता है ना, under the influence of kala and the modes, the prakriti gets agitated and becomes mahatattva. So earlier it was in the guna samya. Guna samya means equilibrium. Guna samya, without interaction. Equilibrium. फिर काल उसमें एक्ट हुआ, तो then the transformation starts. Earlier it was nirvishesh, guna samya, prakriti which was guna samya, which was in equilibrium state without any interactions, and nirvishesh without any specific qualities. फिर उसमें क्या हो गया, भगवान काल आ गए, तो क्या हो गया फिर, interaction starts, the changes manifest. Srila Prabhupada writes, nothing can happen without the intervention of the Lord. If the Lord is not there, no interactions will happen. We have heard that there are two types of creation, primary creation. What are they? Primary creation के दो types, दो levels.
This Karna
Karan Srishti and Karya Srishti. So after the Karan Srishti is over, what happens? Anyone remembers?
this one, cohesive.
उसके पहले क्या होता है? कोहेसिव के पहले क्या होता है? कारण सृष्टि हो गई, अभी
एक
They remain 1,000
हाँ,
years.
क्या होता? हाँ,
They remain in an unmanifested state in that state for 1,000 years.
okay, then what happens?
Lord enters.
How? Why?
Then the
Right.
living entity
They
created by the
pray.
agency.
What impels God to enter? All the devatas, sense devatas, they pray. कि भाई अब ये सब तो बन गया लेकिन कुछ भी हो नहीं रहा है, you know? Now you do something. Then Lord sends his cohesive energy, that is called as कौन सा शक्ति? तो एक शब्द है, बिभ्रत शक्ति. Then Bibrat Shakti of the Lord enters and all the elements they combine to form the universal shell. उसके बाद भी 1000 साल तक कुछ नहीं हो रहा है, बन गया फिर भी, then the Lord enters. So basically without the intervention of the Lord nothing happens. And the purpose of this fifth creation is the same. कि जब तक भगवान enter नहीं करेंगे the creation will not happen. So in this chapter we'll see in the end again and again this will come. That the sense devatas, the wind god entered, still the universal form was not rising. फिर ये भी आ गए, फिर भी नहीं उठ रहे, फिर ये भी एंटर किया, फिर and ultimately the Lord Vishnu entered and then the universal form rose. So only by the intervention of the Lord the creation starts. Prabhupada gives example of Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Ajagala Stana Nyaya. Ajagala Stana क्या होता है मालूम है? आज किसको बोलते हैं? आज means goat. There are nipples on the neck of a goat. So if somebody thinks वहां से दूध निकालेंगे, तो वहां से दूध नहीं निकलता है. So similarly, material nature appears to the scientists to act and react in wonderful manner. But in fact, actually nothing is happening in the material nature unless the Lord intervenes. Prabhupada gives another example. Anyone knows another example which Prabhupada says that Lord gives the seed only then the material nature creates. But scientists they think देखो material nature तो अपने आप creation कर रही है. Where is the God? क्या example देते हैं Prabhupada? Scorpion lays its eggs in the heap of rice and the scorpions are coming out. So the scientists say देखो अपने आप rice is giving rise to scorpion. No, so that's how material scientists they think that everything is happening automatically. Where is God in picture? Prabhupada gives example of that. Okay. Then 18th verse. Anta Purusha Rupena Kala Rupena Yobahi
Yo bahi.
Samanvetesha Sattvanam
By exhibiting these potencies, the Supreme Personality of Godhead adjusts all those different elements, keeping himself living the super soul and without bystander.
So now he describes that in this way there are 24 elements of Prakriti. Adding time 24 तो हो गए, उसके बाद 4 और है. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, in this way there are 24 elements of Prakriti, then you add time, then Jiva, then Prakriti, and the Lord. So हो गए 28. So some people say there are 25, some people say 26, 24, 28. वो 11th canto में अच्छे से description आता है उद्धव गीता में. Lord is telling, some people say there are 3 elements, some people say 5, some people say 7, some people say 8. सब सही है. It depends on how you put things together. So here he's saying it becomes 28. तो 24 तो देख लिया हमने. पंचवी ब्रह्मा वो सब 24 हो गए. उसके बाद जीवा, time, prakriti and the Lord. They become 28. So Srila Prabhupada also writes in the purport. Here it is stated that within the heart the Supreme Lord resides. Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hridadeshe Arjuna Tishtati. So that Supreme Lord, Eshiyaha, that means this Supreme Lord, by his own energy, by his Atma Mayaya, by his own potency, what happens? He exists as Antaryami. Antaha Purusha Rupena, he exists as Antaryami. Then he exists as Kala Rupa. एक तो अंतर्यामी, फिर काल के रूप में भी रहते हैं. And then he exists in the form of time also. So that's how he describes. There are 24 elements and plus 4, that means 28. Then Prabhupada writes how the Lord and soul and super soul they are. Prabhupada is focusing on the word Anta Purusha Rupena. So the super soul in the heart is not sitting alone, he is sitting with the soul. The example is 2 birds on a branch. श्वेताश्वतर उपनिषद में आता है. Those पर्णो सयुजा सखाया समान विक्षो पुरुषो निमग्नो. And what is the job of a super soul? करते क्या super soul? खड़े रहते खाली.
Witnessing.
कहाँ है भगवत गीता में? नहीं वो तो ठीक है. उपद्रष्टा and अनुमंता. He is observer and facilitator. For a devotee, Lord is not a neutral observer. He is an active guide. For a non-devotee, he just observes. क्या कर रहा है? कूद रहा है? अच्छा देखते रहेंगे. You want to jump? He'll see. But for a devotee, he is an active guide. He's not just a neutral observer. So that is what is described always. When one becomes a devotee, the Lord is the active guide for a devotee. Prabhupada writes about Updrasha and Anumanta. Since the living entity is constitutionally part and parcel of the Lord is very affectionate to the Jiva. Unfortunately, the living entity is bewildered and he forgets his relation. As soon as he becomes aware of his constitutional position, he is liberated. What is the definition of mukti? Second canto, 10th chapter describes. Prabhupada quotes hundreds of times this line. What is mukti?
Liberation from the
हाँ, एक श्लोक का एक ही लाइन बहुत बार बोलते हैं प्रभुपाद. मुक्ति हित्वा अन्यथा रूपम स्वरूपेण व्यवस्थिति. So that is mukti, when one gets situated in the swarupa. What is the swarupa? Jivera swarupa hai. So when one becomes aware of his constitutional position, he is liberated. The minute independence is exhibited by his marginal position. तटस्थ है, इधर भी जा सकते हैं, इधर भी जा सकते हैं. Lord never takes away the इच्छा शक्ति. If he likes, he can forget the Lord. If he likes, he can turn towards the Lord. Lord just facilitates. ये तमाम प्रपद्यन्ते. मत्ता स्मृति ज्ञान अपोहनम. The Lord is not a whimsical person. इसको भुला देते हैं, इसको याद दिलाते हैं. He just reciprocates. If we want to remember the Lord, Lord will make us remember. If we want to forget, Lord will make us forget. So that's how the Lord works. Okay, so now after this, so 3 verses described, 4 verses describe time factor. Then 19 to 22 describes the characteristics of Mahat Tattva. What is there in Mahat Tattva? Translation, 19th verse.
After the Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnates the material nature, which is internal potency, material nature delivers the sum total of cosmic intelligence, which is known as Hiranyamaya. This takes place in the material nature when she is agitated by the destinations of the conditions.
Okay, so this material nature, the word used is Parapuman, that Supreme Personality of Godhead. What he does? Adhatta Viryam Sasuta. He impregnates the jivas into the womb of Prakriti. Adhatta means impregnates. Viryam, his internal potency. Sa, the internal potency, that means the jiva is impregnated in the womb of material energy. So the Lord impregnates jivas in the prakriti. मतलब same thing बता रहे हैं ना, क्या होता है? वो what are the characteristics of महतत्व, मतलब आगे क्या हुआ वही characteristic है. प्रकृति में Lord glances, impregnates the jivas. So then what happens? The prakriti has guna also. तो गुना gets agitated. अभी जीवा आ गया अंदर, तो जीव के कर्म और स्वभाव आ गए. So jivas, they start working. कर्म और स्वभाव गुण के हिसाब से. So according to the guna, according to the karma, and according to the swabhav, the prakriti starts getting agitated and gives birth to what? Asuta. Asuta means delivery हुआ. क्या delivery होता है? प्रकृति में जब ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन हुआ तो व्हाट गेट्स डिलीवर्ड? क्या बनता है? सिंपल. नेक्स्ट स्टेज क्या है? प्रधान का नेक्स्ट स्टेज महतत्व बनता है. That is what is described. Mahatattvam. Prakriti becomes Mahatattva. That is Hiranymayam, brilliant, effulgent. It is effulgent. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes. Yeah. Now, in describing the characteristics of the elements, first the primordial quality previous to the appearance of Chitta is described. So, Chitta is the quality of Mahatattva. The Lord delivered the jiva into the manifest abode of the gunas agitated by time. Prakriti gave birth to Mahatattva and it had great brilliance. Okay, next, Srila Prabhupada writes. Material nature's primal factor is Mahatattva, the breeding source of all varieties. This part of material nature, which is called Pradhana, as well as Brahman, is impregnated by the Lord. The same thing Prabhupada writes. Prabhupada gives example how the father impregnates the mother. Just like similarly, living entities impregnated by material nature, by the Lord into the material nature. Next verse, translation.
Thus, after manifesting very wickedness, the effulgent Mahatattva, which contains all the universes within itself, which is the root of all cosmic manifestations, and which is not destroyed at the time of annihilation, swallows the darkness that covered the effulgent at the time of dissolution.
Okay, so because it is brilliant with the living entities, the darkness is destroyed. This Mahatattva, Vishwam Atma Jagat Vyanjan, this universe is contained within the Mahatattva. Because ultimately, सब कुछ कहाँ से आ रहा है? Mahatattva से ही आ रहा है. So Mahatattva contains the universes. So this Mahatattva is Jagad Ankurah. Jagad का अंकुर है. You know, when we see the picture of Mahavishnu's, from Mahavishnu pores, the universes are coming out. ऐसा नहीं होता है. What comes out is from Mahavishnu's bodily pores. What comes out?
द्रव्य.
द्रव्य comes out. हमारे स्वेट निकलता है तो उनका भी स्वेट ही निकलता है ना. उनका स्वेट is प्रकृति. Our sweat is different. हमारा स्वेट से भी कुछ material elements are coming. His sweat is the source of all the material elements. That's why it is called, and then further transforms into Mahatattva, which is called as Jagad Ankur. वो अंकुर है, पूरा जगत नहीं निकल रहा है, अभी तक जगत आया ही नहीं है, अभी प्रधान के बाद महतत्व, महतत्व is called as Jagad Ankurah, and this Jagad Ankur is Kutastha, it is unchangeable. And this Jagad Ankur manifests the material universe. Okay. Next verse, translation. Prabhupada gives an analogy in the purport. A person at night remains inactive, covered by the darkness of night. But when he is awakened in the morning, the covering of the night disappears. Similarly, when the Mahatattva appears after the night of dissolution, the effulgence is manifested to exhibit the variegatedness of this material world. 21st verse, translation.
The mode of goodness, which is the pure soul purpose of understanding the personality of Godhead, and which is generally called Vasudeva, or consciousness, becomes a manifest in the Mahatma.
So now what is getting generated?
Yes.
From the Mahatattva, Mahad Atmakam. From this Mahad Atmakam, what gets generated? This Mahad Atmakam is represented by Chitta in the body. हमारे शरीर में वो सब elements हैं. All the 28 elements are there, right? So how the Mahatattva is represented in the body? By Chitta. Chitta represents Mahatattva in the body. That is what is described here. Chittan tan mahad atmakam. चित्त जो है वो कैसे बॉडी में रिप्रेजेंटेशन है उसका? दैट इज महत्त्व जो है, दैट इज रिप्रेजेंटेड बाय चित्त. एंड महत्त्व इज इन विच मोड इन द बिगिनिंग? सबसे पहले तत्व में ही रहेगा ना. सो सबसे पहले जो सत्व में रहता है उसको क्या बोलते हैं? दैट इज कॉल्ड एज सूत्र तत्व. इफ वी रिमेंबर, समबडी रिमेंबर्स, सूत्र तत्व को महत्त्व in the mode of goodness. So that is what is described. Yat tat sattva gunam. Sattva gun में है, महत्त्व is in the mode of goodness. And what is this sattva gun? Swachham, pure, shantam, peaceful, bhagavat padam. And this sattva guna is a place where we can worship the Lord. Sattva guna is the ideal platform where we can worship the Lord. So that is why it is described as Mahatattva in the mode of goodness. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, the Mahatattva manifests the material elements starting with Ahankar, which was situated within it in a subtle form. हमने वही पढ़ा है ना, बहुत बार पढ़ा है. महातत्व से सबसे पहले क्या बनता है? अहंकार. And then Mahatattva is fixed and without agitation, and it is, so all that is described. Okay. तो अभी 21st वर्स के purport में commentary में श्री प्रभुपाद चक्रवर्ती ठाकुर is writing. What is known as Chitta is composed of Mahatattva. This means Mahatattva is present in the individual body in the form of Chitta. Okay? It is a place for worshipping Supreme Lord and is called as Vasudeva. Then, this is interesting. Chitta, Ahankar, intelligence and the mind, they together are called as what? अभी हमने डिस्कस किया. ये चार चीजों को साथ में क्या बोलते हैं? अंतःकरण. All these four elements have their presiding deities. Every element has a presiding deity. सबका एक deity है ना. All the elements have presiding deity. So Chitta, because it is situated in goodness. Who is the Devta of goodness? Vasudeva. तो वासुदेव है चित्त के deity. Then ahankar, the deity of ahankar is sankarshana. Deity of intelligence is pradyumna. Deity of the mind is aniruddha. Who are respectively and who are worshipped for purifying these elements. So, ये तो सबसे ऊपर वाले बॉस हैं, चार जो हो गए ना, वासुदेव, संकर्षण, प्रद्युम्न, अनिरुद्ध. उनके नीचे कौन है? Who controls चित्त? विष्णु, शुद्ध सत्वगुण वाले. फिर who controls अहंकार? शिव जी, रुद्र. Who controls intelligence? That is Brahma ji. So, and who controls mind? Mind gets affected by moon. Therefore, now when somebody has some mental issues, क्या बोलते हैं, lunatic बोलते हैं. The mind, the moon affects the mind a lot. So therefore, it is said that one should not sleep under the moon. It is not so much conducive for the mind. Mind gets affected, gets disturbed. Okay, so then he continues. Next verse translation.
For the manifestation of Mahatsattva, these features appear simultaneously as water in its natural state. Before coming in contact with earth, it's clear, sweet, and unwavering. So the characteristic states of pure consciousness are complete serenity, clarity, and freedom from distraction.
Okay, so this chitta, now he is giving some more characteristics of chitta. What is pure consciousness? This chitta, it is known to have purity, swachhatvam, avikaritvam, changeless, shantatvam, peacefulness. These are the qualities of chitta. And he gives an example. Yatha apam prakriti para. Just like the nature of pure water. Just like the water is clean. Pure water is clean. Similarly, the Mahatattva, it has all these features of serenity, clarity, and freedom from distractions. Shantatvam, avikaritvam, swachhatvam. That is called as that. These are the qualities of chitta. Okay, so Srila Chakravarti Thakur writes, the qualities like purity are found everywhere in the chitta of the body. We are thinking, well, अभी तो चित्ता तो contaminated consciousness बोल रहे हैं, तो यहाँ पे contaminated consciousness का qualities ऐसा ऐसा बता रहे हैं, सच्चत्वम, अविकारित्वम, शांतत्वम, ऐसा कैसे है? How come such wonderful qualities? So basically, predominantly in this material world, the contaminated consciousness is the first thing. And in the beginning, the contaminated consciousness, it is like the best of the worst. So, तो इस संसार में सबसे गया गुजरा जो है, मतलब जो क्या बोलते हैं, जो सतयुग का सबसे गया गुजरा होगा, वो कलयुग में आएगा, तो उसको यहाँ पे साधु बनाएंगे. तो ऐसा है. Although it is contaminated consciousness, but still, in the highest form, it manifests all these things. Swachhatvam, avikaritvam, shantatvam, because it is the mode of goodness. Goodness has all these qualities. Okay, translation 23rd and 24th. Same things are described again. Yeah, 23, 24.
Material ego springs up from the Mahatattva, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, goodness, passion, good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind, in the sense of perception, organs of action in the gross elements evolve.
So now, after describing Mahatattva के बाद क्या बनता है? सबसे पहला element after Mahatattva, false ego. So now, in next 4 verses, the characteristics of false ego is described. There are three types of false ego. False ego in the mode of goodness, false ego in the mode of passion, false ego in the mode of ignorance. False ego in the mode of goodness से क्या आता है? Anyone remembers? Mind and the 10 sense devtas. False ego in the mode of passion से क्या आता है? Intelligence and
कर्मेंद्रिय
10 senses, 5 working and 5 knowledge acquired. False ego in the mode of ignorance से क्या आता है?
false ego, ahankar.
False ego in the mode of ignorance gives rise to what? अरे तन्मात्रास 5 gross elements and 5 sense objects ना. और पर बहुत पूरा अच्छा टेबल है ना, वही तो पूछ रहा हूँ. Anyways, आप लोगों को लग रहा है अभी प्रभु जी क्या बोल रहे हैं, उनको ही समझ रहे हैं जो भी बोल रहे हैं. हमको समझ गया कि इनको समझ गया. Anyways, so ये जो तीन है उनको एक नाम दिया है. किसी को याद है वो टेबल देख के तो बोलिए चलिए. ओ जो सुबोधिनी में एक टेबल है उसमें कुछ तो नाम दिया है. 3 प्रकार की शक्ति है. कौन सी शक्ति है? फॉल्स ईगो इन द मोड ऑफ इग्नोरेंस इज विच शक्ति? अरे देख के तो बोलिए, टेबल ही नहीं है.
वैकारिक का
नहीं,
अहंकार
एक बोलते हैं ज्ञान शक्ति, दूसरी है क्रिया शक्ति, तीसरी है द्रव्य शक्ति. तो यही यहाँ पे दिया गया है.
क्रिया शक्ति
सुना है ना ये कि सेकंड कैंटो पे वापस आए हम लोग. ओके, आपका फॉल्ट नहीं है, और टॉपिक ही इतना टेक्निकल है तो क्या करेंगे. सो दैट्स व्हाट इज डिस्क्राइब्ड हियर. महत्तत्व विकुर्वाणा. विकुर्वाणा means when the transformation of महत्तत्व happens, how it happens? भगवत वीर्य संभवात. जब तक भगवान अंदर उसमें इंटरफेयर नहीं करेंगे, no transformation happens. So then when the महत्तत्व gets transformed, the ahankar is generated, and ahankar is endowed with 3 types of shakti. त्रिविधा शक्ति, ज्ञान शक्ति, क्रिया शक्ति and द्रव्य शक्ति. So kriya shakti jnana shakti manifests as false ego in the mode of goodness. उसको क्या बोलते हैं? एक वर्ड याद रखिए, वैकारिक अहंकार. सुना ये वर्ड पहले? वैकारिक अहंकार. Then from the passion, false ego in the mode of passion, तेजस अहंकार. यहाँ पे दिया है सब. वैकारिकस, तेजसस and तामसश्च. तामस अहंकार. and उनसे क्या क्या आता है वो सब दिया है. From वैकारिक अहंकार what comes? मनस. From तेजस अहंकार what comes? The 10 senses. And from tamas ahankar what comes? Bhutanam. The 5 objects, sense objects and 5 material elements. वही सब दिया है, बस ज्यादा कुछ नहीं है. वही वही बार बार हम लोग को पढ़ाया जा रहा है. Srila Prabhupada, again he does not go into the details of all this. Srila Prabhupada ultimately brings one to the point of false ego. In the beginning, from clear consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. What is the first contamination? Ego, I am this body, I am controller. And then after a few lines, Prabhupada writes, it is mentioned in Upanishads. The path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. Anyone knows the verse? शूरस्य धारा निशिता दुरत्यया दुर्गम पथस्तत् कवयो वदन्ति. सब कवि क्या बोल रहे हैं? It is not so easy. तो क्या करना है? दुर्गम पथ और शूरस्य धारा है. So how to practice spiritual life? महाजनो येन गतः स पंथा, उसमें आता है ये लाइन। क्योंकि सब लोग अपना अपना अलग अलग बोलते हैं, हम ये बोल रहे हैं ऐसा करेंगे, वो बोल रहे हैं वैसा करेंगे, तो शूरस्य धारा है तो कैसे बचेंगे? Whatever great people say, you should follow. Prabhupada writes, one shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. So a living entity has a free will. We have misused our free will, so therefore we have come in this material world. So that is inattentiveness. So again, we have to use the same independence, free wills to connect to Krishna. That's what Prabhupada is writing here. Okay. Then Prabhupada says false ego is the basic principle of all material activities. So after describing how the false ego is created, in 25th verse, the deity of the false ego. Who is the deity of false ego? Abhi bataya. Shankarshan. That is described in the 25th verse. Translation.
Threefold ahankar, the source of the gross elements, the senses and the mind, is identical with them because it is their cause. It is known by the name of Shankarshan, who is directly Lord Ananta with a thousand heads.
Then the characteristics of ahankara are described in the 26th verse. Translation.
This false ego is categorized as a tool, as an instrument, and as an effect. It is further categorized as serene, active, or dull, according to how it is influenced by the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance.
So, karta aham iti manyate, kartritvam karanatvam cha. One thinks I am the doer. So the ahankaram lakshanam. What are the characteristics of ahankara? One starts thinking that I am kartritvam. I am the doer. And karanatvam, the senses. The kartavyam, the karyatvam, the gross senses, the subtle senses. जो भी हो रहा है वो सब मेरे ही क्रिएशन से हो रहा है. आई एम द कंट्रोलर, आई एम द डूअर. ईश्वरो हम भोगी, सिद्धो हम बलवान सुखी. That is the controllership mentality. So Prabhupada emphasizes on that. That is the fault of the material civilization when one thinks that I am the enjoyer. Prabhupada quotes Narottam Das Thakur. When one deviates from pure consciousness of Vasudeva, he becomes entangled. सत्संग छाड़ी कईनो असते विलास ते कारण लागिलोए कर्म बंध फास. Okay, now the characteristics of the mind. अभी तो अंतःकरण का बता रहे हैं ना, पहले अभी चित्त का बोल दिया, अहंकार बोल दिया. Now the mind. The two verses describe the characteristics of the mind. Yes, translation.
From the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place from this because the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire.
Okay. So then Prabhupada describes the symptoms of the mind: determination and rejection. That means this is aversion and attachment. I like this, I don't like this. That is coming from the mind. We desire that which is favorable, we reject that which is not favorable. This is all coming from the mind. However, a man in Krishna consciousness, he rejects and accepts only that which is favorable or unfavorable to Krishna consciousness. Anukulasya sankalpa. Next words translation.
The mind of living entity is known by the name of the Lord Aniruddha, the supreme ruler of the senses. He possesses a bluish black form resembling a lotus flower growing in the water. These found slowly by the natives.
The deity of the mind is Aniruddha. The form of the Aniruddha is described. And Srila Prabhupada writes, this Aniruddha is worshipped by the yogis. And 28th chapter will describe in detail how a yogi meditates on the form of the Lord, starting from the lotus feet to the lotus face. So Srila Prabhupada describes what is meditation. Meditation is not some idle sitting in idle solitary place and meditating on impersonal Brahman. No, it is meditating on the form of Lord. Prabhupada writes, meditation upon voidness is a modern invention of a fertile brain of some speculator. किसी का तो खुराफाती दिमाग है. By meditating on Aniruddha, one can become free from the agitation of acceptance and rejection. One becomes desireless. What is real desirelessness?
Desire to serve the Lord.
Where it comes, anybody remembers? Srila Prabhupada writes in Bhagavad Gita. It comes in second chapter, I think 70th verse. वो श्लोक है विहाय कामान यः सर्वान् पुमांश् चरति निःस्पृहः निर्मम निरहंकार स शान्तिम् अधिगच्छति. In that, Prabhupada writes, what is real desirelessness? Real desirelessness means desire to serve Krishna only. So that's how a devotee always rejects what is unfavorable and accepts what is favorable. Okay, so now after description of the mind, Tejas Ahankar. Tejas Ahankar से क्या आता है? Tejas means passion. क्या आता है? Senses and intelligence आता है. So intelligence is described in the next two verses. Transformation. Translation.
By transformation of the false ego in passion, intelligence takes birth over state. The functions of intelligence are to help in ascertaining the nature of the objects when they come into view and to help the senses.
So the nature of the intelligence is discrimination and determination. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes some purport. To make the distinction from chitta, buddhi is described as vijnana. So यहाँ पे बुद्धि बोला है. बुद्धि तत्वम अभूत सती. Sati means oh chaste lady. Buddhi sattva. So somebody may think intelligence. Chitta also looks intelligence only. So just to have discrimination, यहाँ पे intelligence को क्या बोल रहे हैं? बुद्धि सत्व. Buddhi tattva. Buddhi tattva, sorry. But because it is also awareness, it is said to be a quality of chitta. So chitta has a quality of intelligence also. Buddhi also shows favors to the senses. Without buddhi, the five senses cannot cooperate. We have five working senses and five knowledge acquiring senses. The mind gives strength to the working senses. And working senses and the intelligence gives strength to the working sense, the knowledge acquiring senses, and because that's why when we are hungry, when we don't give food to our gross senses, they become weak. But still the subtle senses, the knowledge acquiring senses are active. The working senses become weak. Hands and legs, they become weak. But the knowledge acquiring senses, they are still active. Because the knowledge acquiring senses, they are shown favor by intelligence. So the intelligence favors the senses. Here it is described. Buddhi shows favor to the senses. Without buddhi, the five senses cannot cooperate. Even though chitta, ahankar, and the mind also assists the senses, buddhi gives special assistance. तीनों assist करते हैं, but buddhi gives special assistance to our knowledge acquiring senses. He gives an example. When I hear a sound, first it is registered by chitta. So how any impulse is processed? बहुत अच्छे से साइंस दिया है. तो कौन who hears when a sound is produced? Who hears? सबसे पहले किधर जाता है? It goes to chitta. Chitta says अभी कुछ तो आ रहा है sound. Then
Yes.
chitta transmits this impulse to the intelligence, buddhi. Then buddhi analyzes. Okay, what is this? This is sound. Buddhi says अभी ये sound है. First perception is by chitta. Then chitta transmits it to the buddhi. Buddhi says क्या है? Says this is sound. अच्छा, which type of sound this is? Should I hear or not? It goes to mind. मन बोलता है अच्छा नहीं है मत सुन. कीर्तन नहीं है मत सुन. Some Bollywood song is going on. So by the mind, I develop the desire. मन का तो वही काम है. इच्छा द्वेष. अच्छा है तो सुनो, नहीं अच्छा है तो मत सुनो. And how all this is propelled? By ahankar. By ahankar, it is related to one's identity. This is how the object becomes manifest to a person.
Previous impressions on the chitta has to be wiped out. Hearing at
Yeah, so based on the previous impressions, a person processes the current sound.
Yeah.
पहले बहुत बॉलीवुड सॉन्ग सुना है तो अभी डिवोटी नहीं है तो वही अच्छा साउंड है सुन लेते हैं. बट नाउ वी हैव टू प्यूरिफाई इट. वो चित्त से ही शुरू होता है, पहले चित्त में जाता है, चित्त से फिर जाके जाके क्या है, हाउ वी हैव प्यूरिफाइड आवर कॉन्शियसनेस that decides how we will respond to a particular impulse.
The same
Very
chitta is
scientific.
compared with the Canto Paramahansa. Like very good impressions on the same chitta.
Yes, that is cheto darpana, that is chitta. The consciousness has to be cleansed off. Okay, so we are on 30th verse. Prabhupada writes some nice purport here. Intelligence is the discriminating power to understand an object, and it helps the senses make choices. Therefore, intelligence is supposed to be the master of the senses. Ideally, intelligence should help one go close to Krishna. But अपना problem क्या है? Intelligence is also corrupted only. Mind बोलता है you should enjoy. Intelligence plus कैसे enjoy करें? Intelligence should say you should not enjoy, but intelligence is contaminated. So intelligence plans how to enjoy. So therefore, Krishna says, take shelter of spiritual intelligence. That is the last verse of the 3rd chapter Bhagavad Gita. क्या बोलते हैं last chapter? Take out last verse of the 3rd chapter. उसमें वो lust resides in 3 places, इंद्रियाणि मनोबुद्धि रस्याधिष्ठानम. उसके बाद last वाला क्या है श्लोक उसमें? How to purify the intelligence by transcendental knowledge. That's how the 4th chapter starts. The last verse describes one take shelter of the intelligence. एवं बुद्धे परम बुद्ध्वा संस्तभ्यात्मानम् आत्मना जहि शत्रुं महाबाहो काम रूपम दुरासद. Take shelter of the spiritual intelligence, not the material intelligence. Evam buddhe param buddhva. So when one uses the spiritual intelligence, then one can fight the enemy of lust. How to purify the intelligence? अभी तो contaminated है, उसके लिए transcendental knowledge लगता है. That is described in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. That's how the progression is. Okay, so then the further characteristics of buddhi is described. Very, very, very important verse. संशयो अथ विपर्यासो निश्चय स्मृतिरेव च
या स्मृतिरेव च
लक्षणं
Misapprehension, correct apprehension, memory, sleep, as determined by their different functions are said to be the distinct characteristics of
Yeah, so intelligence is all these characteristics. Doubt is a symptom of intelligence. If somebody does not doubt, that means there is a problem. But doubt is useful till the time it takes one to the correct understanding. If somebody, even after getting the right knowledge, keeps doubting, then there is a problem. And that's why Krishna says, Samshayatma Vinashyati. Agyasya ashraddhanasya samshayatma vinashyati. So संशय करता है उसका कुछ भी नहीं हो सकता है. अज्ञ है उसको ज्ञान दिया जा सकता है. अज्ञान है, he can be given knowledge. अज्ञ और जिसकी श्रद्धा नहीं है उसको श्रद्धा दी जा सकती है. But a person who has faith, who has knowledge, still he doubts. उसका कुछ नहीं हो सकता. संशयात्मा विनश्यति. So doubt is a symptom of intelligence. Prabhupada writes, doubt is one of the important functions of intelligence. Blind acceptance of something does not give evidence of intelligence. आंख बंद करके मान रहे हैं मतलब कुछ तो गड़बड़ है. Sanshaya is very important. In order to cultivate intelligence, one should be doubtful in the beginning. शुरू में संशय करो, एंड तक संशय ही कर रहे हैं मतलब कुछ तो गड़बड़ है. Doubting is not very favorable when information is received from proper source. Prabhupada writes this, Samshayatma Vinashyati. And then he quotes from Patanjali, Pramana Viparyaya Vikalpa Nidra Smritayam. Same words, Smritaya, same words. Viparyaya Vikalpa Nidra Smriti. ये सब आता है इंटेलिजेंस से. What is Viparyasa? When one is able to analyze his actual position, a false identification with the body is detected. This is called as viparyas. अभी विपर्यास के बाद क्या होता है? अभी false identification पता चल गया. And real identification should be understood. Real understanding is called as निश्चय. पहले विपर्यास. I understood what is wrong. ये गलत है, लेकिन सही क्या है? That is called as निश्चय. Real understanding is called as निश्चय. Or proved experimental knowledge. This experimental knowledge can be achieved when one has understood the false knowledge. By experimental or proved knowledge, one can understand he is not the body but the soul. And then some more symptoms of intelligence are described. Ravindra Swarup Prabhu, he recalls that before joining ISKCON, he would doubt everything. कुछ भी आओ तो doubt ही करना है. And you told once, I had become a high priest on the altar of skepticism. I would doubt everything. And then he realized he was skeptical about everything except the philosophy of skepticism. मतलब keep doubting is also a philosophy. सबको doubt करना है, but you never doubt कि ये philosophy पे doubt कभी आता नहीं. So then slowly he started understanding the fault of this skepticism, and then he started practicing Krishna consciousness. He came in touch with Prabhupada. So that's how intelligence is good till the time it does not take one. Doubting is good till the time it helps one bring to the right understanding. Otherwise, all our doubts will just destroy us. So spiritual intelligence we have to take shelter of, not the material intelligence. Because although in the material world, mind comes from the mode of goodness. कैसे mode of goodness में कैसे रह सकता है mind? Mind तो सबसे ज्यादा चंचल है, एक जगह बैठता नहीं है. Mode of goodness में क्यों बोलते हैं? How come mind comes from goodness? Although it is the most restless, chanchalam mana pramati balvat dridam, review goodness में.
It is restless due to contaminated with the notes. So when it is not contaminated with the other notes, then it is a good thing.
Okay, yes, ठीक है. Actually, mind, what is the function of goodness? गुडनेस में क्या होता है? मेंटेनेंस होता है गुडनेस में, नॉलेज होता है मेंटेनेंस, पैशन में क्रिएशन होता है, डिस्ट्रक्शन होता है इग्नोरेंस। So the mind maintains the desire of the living entity to enjoy. That's why goodness is needed to maintain the desire. उसके लिए भी goodness लगता है. A living entity has a desire to enjoy, so to maintain that desire, mind is needed. So that's why mind is in the mode of goodness. Okay. After this, then he continues to describe further things about all these senses. Translation. 31st verse.
Further, in the mode of passion produces two kinds of senses, the senses of acquiring knowledge and the senses of action. The senses of action depends on the vital energy, and the senses for acquiring knowledge depends on intelligence.
That's what I was telling. मैं भूल गया था उससे. The working senses, they get their power from prana. यहाँ पे लिखा है ना. प्राणस्य ही क्रिया शक्ति. क्रिया से क्या आता है? क्रिया शक्ति से, just go back in the table. क्रिया शक्ति से क्या आता है? तीन शक्तियां कौन सी हैं? ये तो आज याद करवा के रहेंगे. तीन शक्तियां कौन सी हैं?
तेजस.
तेजस ने
क्रिया शक्ति से
क्रिया शक्ति,
द्रव्य
हाँ,
शक्ति.
Vijay Shakti, Kriya Shakti, and
ज्ञान शक्ति, क्रिया शक्ति एंड द्रव्य शक्ति. तो द्रव्य शक्ति से क्या आता है?
false ego.
वो तो तामस अहंकार है. उससे आ क्या रहा है? All the 5 elements and 5 sense objects, 5 tanmatras and 5 objects. तेजस अहंकार से क्रिया शक्ति, उससे क्या आ रहा है?
क्रिया शक्ति से 10 senses and
working senses and knowledge.
10 senses and intelligence. और ज्ञान शक्ति से क्या आ रहा है?
Sense devatas.
Mind and the 10 sense devatas. Okay, ठीक है. So अभी क्या हो रहा है? What empowers the senses? उसमें जो है प्राणस्य ही क्रिया शक्ति. So there are 5 knowledge acquiring and 5 working senses. The working senses are empowered by prana. और प्राण कहां से मिलता है? हमको प्राण कहां से मिलता है? What gives life? प्राण कैसे मिलता है? प्राण मतलब जो प्राण वायु और ये प्राण शक्ति कहां से मिलती है? अन्नम ही प्राणिनाम प्राण. अन्न खाते हैं तो अन्न में प्राण है. इसीलिए जब हम फास्टिंग करते हैं तो क्या होता है? प्राण नहीं रहता है. तो प्राण नहीं रहता है तो कौन से सेंसेस कमजोर हो जाते हैं? वर्किंग सेंसेस कमजोर हो जाते हैं. क्योंकि वर्किंग सेंसेस को शक्ति कहां से मिलती है? प्राण से. प्राण कहां से आ रहा है? अन्न से. तो अन्न नहीं है तो प्राण कम हो गया. प्राण नहीं है तो वर्किंग सेंसेस बेचारे कमजोर हो गए, हाथ पांव सब कमजोर. But still the knowledge acquiring senses are still active. We can still hear after fasting whole day. We can still sit and hear. सेवा करने को बोलेंगे तो नहीं हो पाएगा, लेकिन सुन पाएंगे हम लोग. सुनना बंद नहीं होता है क्योंकि सुनना है. The working knowledge acquiring senses, they get their power from whom? बुद्धे विज्ञान शक्ति. बुद्धि से मिलती है शक्ति. Prabhupada writes ना, the action, the senses for acquiring knowledge depend on intelligence. The knowledge acquiring senses, they are still active when we fast. In Kali Yuga, the prana is stored in grains. पहले के युगों में ऐसा नहीं था. कलयुग में प्राण किधर है? अन्न में प्राण है. तो इसलिए अन्न नहीं खाएंगे तो कमजोर हो जाते हैं. But ज्ञानेंद्रियाज are not dependent on prana. They get their power from बुद्धि. पहले भी अभी यही आया ना, कहाँ गया? बुद्धि से मिलता है शक्ति, किधर गया? Anyways, कहीं तो हमने पढ़ा ना अभी.
बुद्धि तत्व
Anyways, ठीक है, मिलेगा. बुद्धि तत्व में हुआ शायद. बुद्धि तत्व मोक्षति.
This buddhi tattva.
Yeah. So therefore, the knowledge acquiring senses, they are not dependent on prana, they are dependent on buddhi. So although mind, intelligence and chitta, they all give assistance to ज्ञानेंद्रियास, but special assistance, मतलब अगर अन्न नहीं खाया तो हमारा सुनने का और बाकी ज्ञानेंद्रिय भी थोड़ी कमजोर होती हैं, but still we can manage because the assistance, special assistance is given by buddhi. 29th ना, 29th तो अभी वही पढ़, हाँ, okay, same ना, बुद्धि तत्व, yeah, yes, correct. In that, Chakravarti Thakur writes, special assistance is given by buddhi. So, small child can pass even stool, and if the mother is not there, he'll put the hand in the stool only, and he'll put in the mouth also. Why? Intelligence is not developed. Intelligence developed नहीं है, तो ज्ञानेंद्रियास are not working properly. Grown-up man cannot do this, cannot even imagine, because Gyanendriyas are sharp. Intelligence has developed, Gyanendriyas have developed. So if the intelligence is underdeveloped, then the Gyanendriyas are weak. बच्चे में ऐसा ही होता है. Intelligence नहीं है developed, तो Gyanendriyas are weak. What to eat, what not to eat, he can't understand, he can't discriminate. That's the same case with mentally challenged person. Intelligence is not working, he can do anything, he can eat anything. So that's how everything works in a very, very systematic, scientific way. So इतना सब डिटेल में सांख्य फिलॉसफी पढ़ के थोड़ा कुछ समझ रहा है ना आप लोगों को? मुझे तो समझ गया थोड़ा बहुत. Anyways,
Prabhuji,
Oh.
important, like how important it is to understand in depth or just जितना समझता है उतना बस. Sorry.
जितना समझता है समझ लीजिए, एग्जाम में लिखना चाहिए बस.
इनडायरेक्टली क्या टाइप ऑफ क्वेश्चंस पूछने वाले?
इनडायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन से मैं आज तक कुछ पूछा ही नहीं हूँ. वो क्लास में जो भी पढ़ा है वो पूछने लगेंगे तो फिर तो सब लोग का अरे दबो. हम तो खाली जो आपके क्वेश्चन बैंक में है वही पूछ रहे हैं. हमारे पावनेश्वर वो जानते हैं आप, एक हमारे डिवोटी आप जानते हो, वो कॉस्मोलॉजी में एकदम उस्ताद है. ही इज डूइंग पीएचडी इन कॉस्मोलॉजी. वो भक्ति वैभव का क्लास लेते हैं और वो टेस्ट लेते हैं ना, तो जो भी उन्होंने क्लास में बोला है, एक एक चीज में से क्वेश्चन आ सकता है. बाद में मेरे को बोलना मत किधर से आया. सब लोग त्राही त्राही करते हैं, प्रभु जी छोड़. Anyways, तो जितना भी होता है समझिए.
In the beginning only, Prabhuji. Second
Sorry?
shloka, second shloka itself, the Lord gave the result for us to encourage so that we study properly. Second shloka itself.
सेकंड श्लोका भागवतम का.
No, here you mentioned in this chapter, the Lord gives in the beginning itself the result of studying this material
हाँ,
element.
करेक्ट. रिजल्ट ऑफ स्टडिंग पहले ही बोल दिए. ज्ञानम निःश्रेयसार्थाय पुरुषस्यात्म दर्शनम यदाहु वर्णय तत्ते हृदय ग्रंथि भेदनम. हृदय ग्रंथि भेदने का शक्ति है इसमें. Because the more we understand how the nature is so complicated, how Krishna has worked so wonderfully for us, then we develop connection with Krishna. We want to serve and love that person, the person who is assisting the rebellious mentality of a rebellious soul. कौन करेगा ऐसा? You want to go away from me? I'll assist you. How to rebel me? And for that, he has created this whole universe. That's how one should develop connection with the Lord. One should serve the Lord. And of course, the Sankhya means you break down the elements and you get detached from the form which is created by the elements. जितना होता है समझिए.
But after receiving the knowledge also, so when we try to apply this knowledge, that becomes like difficult now, knowing the fact that this is happening because of this.
Yeah, it is not so easy to apply.
So
इतना सब पढ़ के सुन के भी ऐसा क्लास के बाहर जाएंगे तो लिबरेटेड सोल बन के जाएंगे, ऐसा नहीं ऐसा नहीं है. It depends on how we practice, because ultimately we are not following ज्ञान. हम तो भक्ति का मार्ग पालन कर रहे हैं. The process of jnana also leads to liberation, but that is a very difficult process and long process. So a devotee depends on. Abhi, 12th chapter Bhagavad Gita, how it begins? Arjuna asks a question. एवं सतत युक्ताये भक्तास्त्वं पर्युपासते ये चापि अक्षरम अव्यक्तम तेषाम केयो वित्तम. Who is superior, personal or impersonal? So Srimad Chakravarti Thakur gives a different meaning to this. Arjuna says, you have explained me two types of knowledge. You have given me knowledge of Atma in first 6 chapters. You have given me knowledge of Bhagwan in the next 6 chapters. Which is better? 11 तक मेरे को बताया आपने, 7th to 11th भगवत ज्ञान दिया, 1 to 6 आत्म ज्ञान. Which is better? So what does Krishna say? तेषाम के योग वित्तमा. So Krishna says, 12.2 क्या? मय्यावेश्य मनो ये माम नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया पर्योपेतास्ते मे युक्ततमा मता. Begin by practicing Bhagavad Gyan. Maya man. So that is what we are practicing. We are not beginning from Atma Gyan. We are beginning from Bhagavad Gyan. And Bhagavad Gyan leads to Atma Gyan automatically. So this knowledge of Sankhya, ordinary or common devotee may not even understand. वो पढ़ने का हिम्मत भी नहीं करेगा ये सब. बोले इतना भयंकर है ये, तो पढ़ के पूरा जो भी मेरे को आता था वो भी भूल गया मैं. So it is not for everyone. समझेगा नहीं. Chant Hare Krishna and be happy. इसलिए प्रभुपाद जी ने भी ज्यादा कुछ डिटेल में तो बताया नहीं. हम तो विश्वनाथ चक्रवर्ती ठाकुर का परपोर्ट पढ़ के इतना एनालाइज कर रहे हैं, एंड ये इधर से आ रहा है, उसका नॉलेज परसेप्शन, सेंस परसेप्शन कैसे होता है. मतलब ये साधारण व्यक्ति को बोले ये तो साइंस का क्लास चल रहा है कि भगवत गीता चल रहा है कि भागवतम चल रहा है. हाउ द फ्रेग्रेंस इज परसीव्ड. Someone is making samosa. How the samosa is perceived by the mind. इतना सोचना क्या, मैंने स्मेल किया और मेरे को पता चला समोसा है. उसमें ऐसा नहीं है, सिंपल नहीं है. पहले किधर जाता है? चित्त में जाता है. ये तो हद हो गई. तो पहले नोज से फ्रेग्रेंस गया, एक्सटर्नल सेंसेस से प्राइमरी प्रोसेस हुआ, उसके बाद चित्त में गया, चित्त से फिर किधर गया?
प्रीवियस इंप्रेशन.
फिर उसने पहले वाला सोचा, अच्छा ऐसा इंप्रेशन था चित्त में. उसके बाद फिर गया इंटेलिजेंस. इंटेलिजेंस बोलता है अच्छा है क्या? अच्छा है. तो फिर माइंड बोलेगा नहीं. इंटेलिजेंस फर्स्ट एनालाइजेस फ्रेग्रेंस है. पहले तो नाक से गया तो क्या है वो पता नहीं चलता है. पहले फ्रेग्रेंस किसको कौन बताता है? इंटेलिजेंस बताता है ये फ्रेग्रेंस है. अच्छा कौन सा फ्रेग्रेंस है? समोसा है. और समोसा वाला वो उस दिन जो बनाया था ना वैसा ही समोसे का स्मेल आ रहा है. सो अभी इतना सब करके फॉल्सी को बोलता है अरे अच्छा लगेगा खा लेते हैं. तो देन इंटेलिजेंस विल वर्क. ये बहुत कुछ है. इतना क्या जरूरत है असाधारण डिवोटी को. ये तो हम लोग भक्ति वैभव कर रहे हैं इसलिए सोच रहे हैं कब खत्म होगा भाई ये सब, कि हम लोग ये सांख्य खत्म करके लीला को सुनेंगे. ये तो मतलब खतरनाक है. एनीवेज इट विल एंड विद थर्ड कैंटो. इसके बाद इतना कॉम्प्लेक्स नहीं है. इसके बाद आता है फिफ्थ कैंटो और एक भयंकर है. ये खत्म होगा उसके बाद एक और ब्लैक होल है, वो है फिफ्थ कैंटो. और उसमें घुस के निकल गए. एक्चुअली इट इज अ टेस्ट. Actually, Goswami Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, This is a test. Fifth canto is a test to give faith. तब जाके आप सिक्स्थ कैंटो में अजामिल पास टाइम सुनते हैं where you can understand the glories of holy name. It is a test कि भगवान ने ऐसा ऐसा भी बनाया है, ऐसा कैसे हो सकता है? I have never perceived this. वो टेस्ट है, वो स्थान जो है ना, वो टेस्ट है, भयंकर है वो. कौन किधर से क्या आ गया, और there is a jumbo tree. उसका फल इतना बड़ा है कि वो गिरता है तो नदी आती है जम्बू की. तो ये सब एक्सेप्ट करने के लिए फेथ लगता है. एक आम का पेड़ है, वो गिरता है तो आम की नदी बहती है. अरे कुछ भी बोल रहे हैं. So anyways, just ताम से तिक्षस्व भारत, थोड़ा टॉलरेट करके 2-3 चैप्टर और निकल जाएंगे. Then लीला ही लीला है, कुछ नहीं है. Anyways, okay, कहाँ पे थे हम लोग? 31. Okay, it is 5 o'clock. Astro test नहीं है ना?
नहीं, this will go.
श्लोक है ना, 5:15, 5:30 और श्लोक है. Okay, so we were on 31st verse, 32nd verse. नहीं, 32nd नहीं हुआ है. So I'm not reading the purport of Srila Prabhupada. You can read at home. 32nd verse, translation.
When egoism in ignorance is agitated with the sex energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the subtle element sound is manifested. That correct? That is second one. Correct.
हाँ, बराबर.
Element sound is manifested, and from sound come the eternal ethereal sky and the sense of hearing.
So now we know this word Bhagavad Veere Chodita will come many times. Bhagavad Veere Chodita. By the energy of the Lord. Everything is being driven by the energy of the Lord. Bhagavad Veere Chodita. The Lord in the form of the time is impelling all the changes and all the creations. So the first element of the material creation is sound. The universe begins with sound. It does not begin with gross first. It begins with the subtlest of the elements, sound. The sound has 4 divisions. In Uddhav Gita it is described. There are 4 levels of sound. Pashyanti Vak, Madhyam Vak, Vaikarik Vak, and Paravak. Pashyanti Vak means the form in the sound in the form of desire. सबसे पहले क्या होता है? Sound manifests in the form of desire. जो बाहर आपके मुंह से आ रहा है, that is not the first manifestation of the sound. The sound is created first as a desire. That is called as Pashyanti Vak. Then it comes to the next level that is called as Madhyama Vak. From that desire, it comes to the level of the mind in a more gross way. And then it manifests through the mouth, that is called as Vaikarika Vak, जो हम सुन पाते हैं. And the 4th sound is the Paravak, that is spiritual sound vibration. So the whole Vedic scriptures, they are based on how to pronounce purely. The entire, all our chanting, all our practices, it is a practice to chant purely, the pure sound. Prabhupada describes sound is the origin of all subjects, all objects in the material possession, and that by sound one can also dissolve this material existence. Creation जैसे होता है, sound से आया ether, ether से आया form, form से आया, ऐसे ऐसे चलता रहता है, form से आया fire, all these elements. So destruction कैसे होता है? Destruction is in the reverse order. The earth gets dissolved. Then from earth किसमें dissolve हो गया? Fire. Fire किसमें dissolve हो गया? Air किसमें dissolve हो गया? Ether. So that's how the destruction happens. Anavritti Shabda, that is liberation by sound. The material creation began from sound, and sound can also end the material creation. The spiritual sound vibration, the transcendental sound vibration can stop this material creation. So Srila Prabhupada, when he went to America and he chanted this Hare Krishna mantra, many people later they would analyze that this mantra, this tune which Srila Prabhupada chanted, it is not of this world. It is a special mantra, it is a special tune which Srila Prabhupada brought from the another levels. It is not the creation of this world. So Srila Prabhupada could bring the sound from the spiritual world directly. That's why people could immediately relate to it, immediately got connected. Prabhupada writes, our entanglement begins with the sound and it can end by the sound also. And then Prabhupada writes how ear is the first sense of receiving knowledge. One must give oral reception to any knowledge one wants to receive, either material or spiritual. सुनने से ही शुरू होता है. It all begins with hearing. When we hear the material sound, we get entangled. When we hear the spiritual sound, we get liberated. The modern economic development for creation is also a product of hearing. सुना इस संसार के बारे में तो creation की इच्छा होगी. Okay, so then he continues about the sound. Now the characteristics of the sound are described. Next verse, translation.
Persons who are learned and who have good knowledge define sound as that which convey the idea of an object, indicates the presence of the speaker's brain from our view and constitutes the subtle form of it.
So now the characteristics of the sound are described. शब्दस्य लक्षणम कवयो विदु. ये लक्ष्य शब्द का लक्षण क्या है? क्या होता है शब्द? अर्थ आश्रयत्वम, expression of meaning. Simple है ना? When we hear, we know the meaning of some word. And drashturlingatvam, revelation of the seer of the events. अच्छा कौन है ये? उनके बारे में सुन के पता चलता है. And from sound what comes? Sound से कौन सा material element आता है? सबसे subtle कौन सा है? Ether ना? Sound से ether आता है. So तन्मात्रत्वं च नभसो, नभ sound से क्या आ गया? Ether आ गया. So that is what is described. Okay. What is that? Okay, so all these series of verses, they are just describing how the various sense objects and the material elements they are evolving. So हम लोग खाली पढ़ लेते हैं जल्दी जल्दी इसको. If there are any questions, anything to explain, we will discuss more. 34th verse, translation.
Activities and characteristics of the different element can be observed as a provision for room for the external and internal existence of all living entities, namely the field of activities of the vital air, the senses, and the mind.
So now the characteristics of ether is described here. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, the mind, senses, and vital force have forms. They cannot be seen with naked eyes. The production of the invisible sense objects is the external activity of the ethereal element. And the circulation of the vital air and blood is its internal activity. So हमारे body में क्या होता है? Because the ether is there, the air circulates, the blood circulates. Or externally, all these elements, invisible sense objects. Invisible sense objects means the subtle sense objects. They are the external activities. वो है ना Shrotram, Chakshu, Sparshanam cha, Rasanam, Ghranam eva cha, Adhisthaya, Manashchayam, Vishayanutpasevate, Utkramantam, Sitam vapi, Gunjanam va. नहीं क्या वो वायुर्गंधानि वाशयात वाला कौन सा श्लोक? शरीरम यदवाप्नोति यच्चाप्युत्क्रामति ईश्वर गृहीत्वैतानि संयाति वायुर्गंधानि वाशयात. Subtle senses are carried from one body to another through the air or ether. So that is what it is. The subtle forms exist in the ether have been proven by the modern science by transmission of the television. Television so transmission hota hai, ether se hota hai. This verse is the potential basis of great scientific research work, for it explains how subtle forms are generated from the ethereal elements. Okay, so I think we'll stop here. There are some more things to be described here. We'll continue next time.